Toot toot, all aboard!
Here we go. I've opened the windows. We've aired out the studio. You can just feel a little chilly in here to begin with, but yeah, it was a little while since we've all been back around the table. Toot toot, here we go. It is On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast, and Tim Hudak is here, partner at Counsel Public Affairs. Keith Leslie from his lair in Antigonish, political analyst for CHTV, and John Wright is the CEO at Canada Pulse Insights. Welcome back, everybody. Have a good holiday. Tim, how was you guys were busy with the family?
It was glorious. Back home in Niagara the whole time. My family came over for Christmas. Deb's family, lots of time with the girls. Just between us friends, we did sneak across the border to Buffalo. Little shopping, the chicken wings, and a bottle of bourbon is for my medicine. So don't tell the boss.
Okay, we'll get into the morning stages of the 7 degrees of mourning for the Bills in a second. But
sure.
Keith, how about you? How was your holiday?
Excellent as well. We went over to Cape Breton, my brother's in-laws, for Christmas dinner. So a lot of family there, and it was nice. Gave us a snowstorm both ways on the highway to make it that little bit extra more fun on Christmas. We could play that game of, are we on the highway still? But no, overall, it was a lovely Christmas. Great break, and New Year's, nice break.
Good. John, everybody in your new digs for the holiday?
Yeah, we're nestled into a new house, and everything is going well. We had a great Christmas with the family up in the Ottawa Valley, and then Jen and I, for the first time in 25 years, decided we'd try having a vacation with ourselves, just adults without the kids. And so we traveled to Cabo San Lucas, just up the coast from there, and had a great week starting on New Year's Day. So it was wonderful. I'd recommend it to everybody else who wants to get away and try some nice warm climate and great hospitality.
And you're still talking to each other after that.
We actually learned that we had a lot in common. It all worked out pretty well. It's a great test when your kids are no longer at home and you got to live together. So it was wonderful.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. Yeah, we had good fun with the family, and just the way the calendar worked out. Sort of 8:30 Christmas night, dinner's over. We turned off the lights. The last of the guests left, and we kind of cruised into the Christmas New Year's week, and it was quiet. Now, the only thing we did is we went down to the cottage near Peterborough, and we had an ice storm. So
yeah.
give or take. What is December these days in this part of the world without a nice storm? It seems. A few things that we want to get to. There's no shortage of stuff. Let's start with the Premier's meeting with Prime Minister Carney. Tim, it's interesting to see how even before we kind of shut things down for the Christmas holiday, there seemed to be some fissures in the team unity around the premiers and what they were having to say about their regional needs, the MOU on the pipeline, what was going on in Quebec, and we still hadn't yet heard about the EV China deal. But there has been a lot of discord and dissent in those ranks until yesterday. And with the premiers get together and the prime minister's in the room, it would seem as though, I don't know if it was the adult in the room that sort of said, okay, I get it. We've got some issues, but we're going to have to actually put up the front here and get along, or whether it's just performative.
Well, that's a good one. I mean, it's that old line about the more things change, the more they stay the same. I mean, Canada, as throughout our history, right, had these issues that drive a wedge between various parts of the country. And one of the longest lasting ones is the Central Canada manufacturing base versus sort of agriculture and resources in Western Canada. I wonder, I'll talk about that a bit, and then I've got sort of a fun one I'll throw at you on the Premier side. But I wonder if more is coming on auto than has been announced, because Premier Ford was red hot and now has moderated. And I get where he's coming from. I'm on his side. I worry about a deal with China. I worry about the EVs coming in and then eroding our manufacturing base even further, let alone the impact on the American relationship. So I don't blame him for being mad. I understand why Mo's happy. But I do worry that Carney is taking some risks here that may have long run impact on our province. Here's my fun one. At the Premier's Conference and in the time ahead, will Premier Wab Kinew of Manitoba convince Doug Ford not to take Crown Royal off the shelves? Wab Kinew's an incredible communicator. Did you see the promotion he did where he's catching the Crown Royal that Ford poured out and talks about, great Canadian manufactured whiskey? I wonder if he's going to put on the charm offensive, and that will impact where the Premier's currently going on that one.
Yeah, don't waste the good stuff was something along the line,
great.
right? Well, but even there yesterday, Keith, we had Premier Holt from New Brunswick and Ford almost doing the kumbaya routine around what advances we've made in interprovincial trade and how important free trade is going to be in Canada. And they're all kind of arm in arm on this stuff. So they've reignited that conversation. Again, still only talk for the most part and conversation, but a complete change in tone overall from what we've seen in the last month and a half.
Well, I think what we're seeing is, the usual, the way to put the best base on this is families have fights. But when it comes to the overall external threat, we're going to come together. And I think that's what the premiers are trying to do. And I think Tim just mentioned it. Wab Kinew's excellent response on the Crown Royal is just the perfect way to sum up, hopefully, how these provincial differences are going to play out. We know BC and Alberta are going to fight out over pipelines. How do we, mitigate that? There's other parts of the country, the same sort of issues. The concern again about the EVs coming in. Ford's change in tone, though, was pretty dramatic, as you say. And I think that's because the feds are promising a new automotive strategy. And they've told him some of what's going to be in that. And I suspect it's billions of dollars or something else that's really going to make a significant difference to offset the impact of those 49,000 Chinese EVs that are coming in. And I suspect one key part of it is going to be they will lift the electric vehicle mandate, that by 2035, everything must be zero emissions. They're going to have to do that, and they're going to have to do that fairly quickly, I think. But this is Prime Minister Carney's difficult job of balancing all these different regional competitive or differences. Trade rules are still not coming down as much as they should between the provinces, but we are seeing efforts. I mean, Ontario making that deal to push more of its exports through the Port of St. John. That's a huge improvement for New Brunswick. That's a big deal. Ontarians won't notice it as much. New Brunswick will. So it's those kind of building Canada exercises that are really going to drive this along and keep Canada together. But I say overall, it's a family fight. And hopefully if we can keep it to the tone that Wab Kinew is expressing, we'll be much further ahead as the Prime Minister tries to work out and settle all these down, because we do need to present a united front in dealing with not just the United States and Mexico, but the rest of the world.
Well, John, when the Prime Minister went to China, and we knew that was coming, and then I think it was only aware of it a few days before the trip that Premier Mo was going to be in attendance. So you knew that canola was going to be on the table, and that they were going to be talking about it. And I remember talking to somebody about it at the time, thinking it's interesting to me that if canola is on the table, it means there's a ripple effect in Ontario vis-a-vis the automotives, because that's going to be part of this give and take in the conversation. I assumed that the Prime Minister's office would have kept Doug Ford in the loop. It's apparent that he didn't. So to Tim's point, the Premier being more than a little pissed off at how that was played out, and whether that's performative or not, I kind of get it. But to Keith's point, what this suggests to me is that the EV deal probably happened very quickly in China, and then they said, okay, now we got to re-engineer this in terms of the conversation with Ford, because now they're saying, okay, here's what we want to do vis-a-vis in encouraging Chinese or foreign manufacturing here in Ontario. Okay, there's a plan and a sort of a framework to move forward. So this is playing out in real time.
I think that we've all been used to playing checkers. The federal government and its leadership does one thing, and we respond to it another way. And you get upset about things, and then you kind of get some money, or you get a different, candy to make you okay. This Prime Minister is extraordinary. For a number of reasons, I think we're playing three-dimensional chess. I don't think he's got time to make all the calls and do all the things in advance, because he's a business dealing guy. I think that he sees things very, very differently from a business perspective. So as an example, we're going to probably have the South Koreans do submarines for the Canadian forces. If that's the case, I think he's leveraged it to see if we can get South Korean auto part manufacturing or automobile manufacturing here. he is playing, whether it be with the premiers. We saw going into that meeting with the Prime Minister, the premiers of British Columbia and Alberta at very distinct loggerheads over the pipelines. It all dissipated. In fact, it was not only going into that meeting that the two of them said, well, we've got some common ground, but we'll come out of it with some solutions. Mr. Ford went into that meeting, all hot and bothered. A couple of weeks ago, he had pizza with the Prime Minister. He goes into the meeting, he comes out, he's defending the Prime Minister. Look, I think this is very, very different. And I think we have to remember that Mark Carney, before he got a standing ovation in Davos, was the central banker for Canada and for the UK, and is well known to everybody in that room. He's got a tremendous amount of respect, and the speech that he gave there opened the door for middle powers to, cooperate with each other. So I think that we're used to dealing with prime ministers who don't have that kind of relationship. Carney doesn't seem to sleep. He doesn't seem to stop. Out there making deals or putting things in place. I mean, we have now an energy deal with India that we didn't have before, and at the same time, the European Union signs the mother of all deals with India. So we're in a massively changing world, and we happen to have a prime minister who's got all of those contacts. Think of it as a business, and he's a CEO. He knows everybody in the room. He's had like decades of experience with them. He's trusted. Ever since the first days where he invited everybody in the G8 to come, and then invited everybody else to come along with him, along with the others. He's playing a very different game. So I think, you can be argumentative, on what the policy should be and how it's going to affect you. I suspect that he's already figured that out in advance, and how he's actually able to play it in a very positive way. So I think the next number of months are going to be extraordinary, and I wouldn't put it past him, given his 47% vote in the polls right now, that we're actually at an election by May of this year. I think it's going to be an extraordinary era with him at the table.
Yeah, I want to get into that in a second, but just Tim, in that context, I mean, again, think about where we were a year ago, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we were just looking at the Trump 2.0 in the White House. We were looking at the Liberals without a leader, per se, that, what was happening there. The Tories were still riding extraordinarily high in the polls, and we expected it was going to be a knife fight in a phone booth as far as who was going to win the next election. And Trump and all the tariffs and everything were on the table. It raised the expectations around, the elbows up campaign really kind of worked for Mr. Carney. I thought it was really interesting to see some of the media from the United States in the last couple of weeks look at Carney, and they said he's dropped the Mr. Nice Guy routine. and that wasn't his posture during the election campaign. Elbows up, he was going to be the tough guy. Their view is, to extend the hockey analogy, he's dropped the gloves now, and he's ready to be tough. And whether it's tough with the Americans or tough with internationals, but to John's point, to look at what's going on provincially and say, this is great. Now we've got the ground is settled, or it's level anyway. We know exactly what we need to do. I think what's going to happen in the next number of months is a highly accelerated agenda from him, based on his willingness to kind of, okay, I see the vision. This is where I'm going, like it or not. This is what we're going to do.
Yeah, well, I hope so. And I don't know if I agree with the hockey analogy of dropping the gloves. I think it is more about being realistic and being serious. And you're right, Dave. I mean, what a refreshing change in national leadership from the empty shirt who preceded him. Yep. That you're actually, talking with the world as it is, as opposed to lecturing everybody and virtue signaling. And I think across the board, watching the Carney government in action, it's like the adults have returned to the room. He's jettisoned some of the excesses of the Trudeau government. And I do hope that he hits the accelerator, Dave, on things like getting the pipeline built and interprovincial trade, for sure. My question I'll throw back at the gang, if you don't mind, is I do worry, though, that that Carney had so much smoke there at Davos. Will he be susceptible to caring more about what the international community thinks than Canadians think? I don't think it's a risk right now, but I think that may be a temptation for him. I think his risks may be around hubris and then losing track of what's happening on the ground. He's doing a lot of international work, but it tends to be sort of Asia focused, big population. But I think North-South has a lot of opportunity, like beyond the States, in Mexico, South America, and Central. So that's my one concern about what I've seen today, but otherwise, refreshing change.
Yeah, I think, Keith, the idea there is that, and Tim's put his finger on it, we can't be looking at this in a binary view. We can't say it's either the Americans or not the Americans. There will always be the Americans. It's just how we're going to deal with the Americans. It will always be China. It's just how we're going to deal with China. It will always be South America, whatever. It's just how we deal with it. That level of, pragmatism and the realities of the new world have to be taken into account. So I think it's way more nuanced than a lot of the commentary I've seen in media is vis-a-vis, Carney's stance. And again, it's playing out with the premiers right across the province. It's more nuanced than, no, I don't want EVs in Ontario.
Well, the whole reaction to Canada signing a deal with China on some very specific tariffs, not like anywhere near a free trade deal. When Trump, of course, pre-Davos said that was smart of Carney, he should be signing these kind of deals. And then post-Davos, he went nuts and started first time referred to Carney as governor, and took away our invite to the Board of Peace. I mean, that stung.
I feel badly about that.
But all of it just shows, how far the American administration has gone off the beam and just can't really be relied upon. And I think that's Carney's point. And if there's one line of his from Davos, if I kept it out here because I thought it really nailed it. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through economic integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot of heavy lifting going on in that sentence. First of all, the lie of economic integration, that it benefits everybody. He basically alluded to the fact that the U.S. would just go, oh, we're out of the World Trade Organization. To heck with that. They were already doing might makes right whenever it suited them. He's just saying, okay, let's call that out for what it is. Let's take on the whole world and deal with the whole world. And we have to be careful, I think, as we're striking these deals that we don't alienate Mexico too much, because we have to negotiate basically on the same side as them when we're doing the CUSMA thing this year. So It's a really difficult task for the Prime Minister overall. To Tim's point, he is making deals all around the world. And is that shifting his focus, or is it away from what most Canadians see? It's a good question. But I think he has planned a lot of this all the way out. And he knew very well what that relatively short speech in Davos was going to accomplish. And it was going to piss off the Trump administration, but it was also going to set the tone for the world that, hey, Canada's got a point here. They're saying it out loud, what a lot of them were actually literally afraid to say out loud. He said it, put it in context, and all of a sudden he gets a standing ovation because they all agree with him. They agree with him because he was right. The Trump administration cannot be relied on. They're just undependable. They're unpredictable. And that's the worst thing that business can have right now. So I think most of all, Carney's he's on the right track. I think it's all planned out. But of course, there's going to be some missteps along the way, and we're just waiting to see how bad they'll play out. It could be the CUSMA deal. I think that's the most in the most danger right now, depending on how bad the Trump administration reacts to everything Carney does.
Sure, John. Though I think the Davos speech, and to Tim's point, yes, definitely it was internationally, pointed and so on. There's some, domestic foundation in terms of, okay, this is great. Now let's get down to the job. And I think that criticism and analysis from the Conservatives is more than fair. But it gave permission to other countries to take and articulate the same posture. Now, this might have been in relation to NATO, but still the same kind of attitude. And I think it was the Prime Minister of Belgium was talking about, we're happy to be happy vassals of the United States, but we don't want to be miserable slaves. And I'm paraphrasing to some degree. But everybody's beginning to acknowledge that untrustworthy relationship. So that in some cases puts wind in Carney's sails internationally, but also domestically, because then I think he can say, okay, at least we're all singing from the same hymnal when we want to do a trade deal, when we want to look at how our economies are integrated beyond the United States.
Well, again, I contrast the two eras in Davos. On the one hand, we have a prime minister who knows everybody in that room, who gets a rare standing ovation. Only two others have had one. Who's done 12 deals, who's constantly on the road, who's gone to China and opened a door and taken actually not a huge step forward, but actually going back to where Harper was. I mean, Harper's government complained about human rights, but had a good trade policy underneath it. Is opening the doors in all of these places. And next door at the same time is Justin Trudeau and Katy Perry and Katie Telford talking about soft power and feminism. I mean, what alternate universe are we now in and dealing with? And again, I come back to this and say, this prime minister is about 3 steps ahead of everybody in this country. We've been used to a very different kind of politics. He goes into these rooms and he's able to pull out of his back pocket and say to Doug Ford, you know what? Thanks. What you said, we had pizza over. Everything is good that way. Let me tell you what I've really got going on for you. Bang, bang, bang. Opens the door and the other 2 premiers come in. And David Eby's there with Danielle Smith. And it's kind of like, you know what? I got this for you. I got this for you. And we're going to put it together and everything will be okay, blah, blah, blah. And then he's got national unity in the background that he's thinking about as well. Like, look at the numbers that have just come out over the last 24 hours and how he's doing in Quebec. I mean, the Bloc Québécois disappeared. The NDP across the country has disappeared in terms of how he's doing this. I say, look, I think this conversation and how we're approaching it would have gone exactly the way I would predict it would have gone a year and a half ago under Trudeau. At that time, I said that if you took a look at the polling, 17% of this population was actually over with Poilievre because they didn't like Trudeau. And as soon as you got rid of Trudeau, up it came like a sponge cake, and they were back into the 30s and they carried on to the next level. I think we're dealing with an extraordinary prime minister who's got all of these different connections. And we're arguing. It's funny about this. We're kind of arguing about Crown Royal and whether it's getting poured out of the bottle and whether you're going to save a couple of hundred jobs like that. And Carney's out there in Davos getting the accolades of the world, doing 12 to 14 more. I don't think he cares about Donald Trump right now. And does anybody really believe that Comes is going to be renegotiated? There's a president who basically says, screw you, I'll do what I want. So I think he understands that the game is up, that it's a different game. And he's working with Europe. He's working with all allies. He's got a great relationship with the Mexicans on all of this stuff. No, we've got an extraordinary deal maker. And he is able to not play premiers against each other, but to play with the premiers and figure out how to get this solved. We'll talk about national unity at some point. That's a file which is being, I think, overblown when you look at the numbers and what's going on here. But no, I think we're into a different era, and I think we have to kind of step up to it as opposed to pretend how we've been dealing with things for the last 20 years is the way it's going now.
I thought there was a bit of a tell, though, this week, Tim, when we heard that the president picked up the phone and called Carney post Davos after, complaining about it. And that's where, Scott Besson said, I was in the room and Carney, aggressively walked back all of his comments in Davos. And we'll get to that in a second. But if NATO made Trump blink, as it were, on Greenland, he may have blinked on his relationship with Canada this week to some degree, because it sounds out of character for him to pick up the phone after all of this that went on in Davos and say, hey, Mark, it's Donald. How you doing? I mean, there's that kind of, it just seems out of character based on what John has just said vis-a-vis the unpredictability of this president. Tell me what you think. I mean, let's play three-dimensional chess here. What's on the board in front of Carney for CUSMA? Because we're all kind of painting a dire view of CUSMA, based on what we're seeing and the tone and the posture of the prime minister. Maybe we shouldn't be.
Yeah, I was hoping that I'd see if you folks agree. Like, I think 2025 was the craziest year in public affairs, and all the time I've been part of it or watched it from the sidelines. And I was hoping 2026 would slow down and drift at least towards some form of normalcy or stability. And it just seems like it hit the accelerator instead. So I still remain an optimist. I still think we hit flat ground after this tumultuous roller coaster in due course. But I think, Dave, you're giving a bit too much credit to Trump here. I think he reacts out of emotion. I don't think there was a overall game plan by him. I suspect and think I understand there's more happening behind the scenes on negotiations and what trade-offs are than has been in the public eye. So perhaps the president was moving that forward My gut though tells me it's random, as opposed to any kind of particular plan. It's just whatever is in front of him that day. Look, do I think Carney has a 3D chess plan? No, I think he's actually trying to make realistic decisions to understand that the American nature since post-World War II to open up their markets broadly, to support international institutions, to defend the world, has worn thin on the American public, and Trump represents that. So I think he's looking for the best options available to try to keep afloat to get to that stability.
So, Keith, you go back to the comments, though, made by Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary this week. And I, for the most part, I think that's another tell in terms of the anxiety in the Oval Office, that he's talking about the Prime Minister should not be virtue signaling, while we're coming up to CUSMA, and then takes a sort of a personal shot at him. In my investment career, I have seen what happens when a technocrat tries to pivot and become a politician. It never really works out well. So far, it's worked out reasonably well. But that smarmy attitude from the cabinet reflects, the anxiety. And I think that maybe I'm overthinking it, as Tim said, but that they're on their back foot here in terms of what they're going to do moving into CUSMA.
Well, Bessent is always going on about the threat to CUSMA by Canada's behavior, but I think he actually, displayed the Trump administration's general lack of ability to grasp reality this week when he said that Canada really should not be picking a fight with the United States ahead of CUSMA. I'm pretty sure we're not picking a fight, that we're reacting to what's been going on to us, and I think most Canadians have made that pretty clear. We just don't understand why we've been picked on. We feel we're being bullied, and we're reacting. But for him to say that Canada, Carney in particular, is wrong to pick a fight. He's a technocrat. They never make a good politician. Well, ask Canadians how they're feeling about this guy. And the polls have done that. John's just mentioned. I mean, his approval ratings through the roof for reasons because, A, he's not Trudeau. We saw a change. People would definitely want a Trudeau out. But Carney's come in and, stood Canada up on the entire world stage, stood up to Trump and what's going on with him. And as you say, it's not just about Trump. It's about where we are in the world. And where do we see him right now? In the right spot. Has he got negotiations going on behind the scene that are actually getting further in CUSMA? I know LeBlanc is heading to Mexico this week. Again, Canada and the United States have to be pretty close here in what we're going to push from the United States if there's to be a third agreement of this. It's supposed to be just a renewal. I suspect it's going to be a complete renegotiation, or it's going to be scrapped. It's very, very crucial, I think, to Canada and Mexico both that we keep it, that there's some sort of agreement here. But I agree with Carney's position that, a bad deal is not one worth signing. So not a bad deal, but we need a good deal, not at any cost, though.
But do you think, honestly, again, going back to the last Prime Minister that we've had, Canada had no chips on the table, no leverage, no nothing. It's kind of like, oh, please give us that deal. Oh, please save our auto sector. Even look at the defense situation now, where we've got an open discussion about whether the F-35 should be all bought up. And we've now got the prospect of Sweden giving into the Gripen. And yes, they're inferior in terms of the aircraft lethality, but it may come with manufacturing jobs, and you split the fleet. It's kind of like, okay, well, we'll take 25 of the F-35s and we'll do the rest with the Griffins, and we'll make it all work. And that'll be our gateway into Europe through the new Defense Resiliency Act. And plus, we're going to get the Bank of Resiliency. That's going to open up trading opportunities with all these other people. It's a pipeline that's just much bigger. If you were dealing with Trump, would you be on your knees every single day hoping that you had a relationship so you could negotiate this trade deal? Crap, no. I'd hope you'd be out the back door making deals all over the place to bring this to, because what he's got now is leverage. Canada had absolutely no leverage, none whatsoever with Trump. And he was basically going, remember what Lutnick said when he was at the conference at BMO last year? It was basically, hear that sucking sound? It's all leaving your country. Our exports to the United States are down from 75% now into about 67%. We're moving in different directions in terms of all kinds of deals, whether it be on the F-35, which we haven't said anything about, or whether we've got Korea coming in the door. Look, I think we should get off the ground. Get off our knees in hoping that we get this CUSMA agreement and that we've got good relations. I think that we look across the world and go, holy shit, we've now got the world stage that we're working on. And Carney's bringing all of these pieces to the table. It's kind of like you look at Trump and say, you know what? just keep talking. I don't care. We'll see you later. I
Well,
think
we can't let that 85% of our stuff is covered under CUSMA. We can't lose that tariff-free
Well,
85%.
but there's no guarantee we're ever going to keep it. They've kept threatening that they're going to tear it up. They're going to keep threatening that they'll renegotiate it. Like, what is it to negotiate with Trump? One day he's on your side, you know, oh, we got a good relationship. The next day he throws it away. Hey, that deal you did with China, it's a good thing he's out there. The next day, bang, if he does that, we're going to screw him over. I don't think a prime minister or anybody, including any of us here at this table, would sit around and kind of bank everything here. We would be off trying to backfill so that we have some leverage. And I think this is what's going on. Again, Trudeau would never have done this, right? Like this would never have been done under him. And we're dealing with a very different prime minister who's looking across the world and saying, I'm going to call in this chip, this chip, this chip, and this chip, and we're going to put leverage over here. So I don't think that he's not concerned about CUSMA. It's just that I'm not going to stand around and wait for this guy who basically would rip it up in a second if I said something, you know, in another country. We've got to make sure that we have leverage, and this is what he's getting for Canada.
Just 2 footnotes here. Every time I type in Lutnick, it autocorrects to Nutlick. I don't know why.
Oh no!
Just saying. On the F-35 issue, this to me, Tim, is a really good example on a number of levels of where it's going to require strong, measured, focused leadership in terms of how we conduct this deal. I talked to retired Major General Scott Clancy yesterday. He was a RCAF veteran, 37 years, former director of ops at NORAD. And, you know, he said, admittedly, I'm a NORAD guy. So I'm worried first and foremost about defense in Canada and defense in North America. And he said, we need to have the F-35 because it's the superior aircraft for all the right reasons. But he also said, this is an example of where, you know, we kind of have eyes wide open. We know we're going into a deal with the Americans on this particular asset, and as unstable as it may be, unreliable as they may be, the fact of the matter is this is the right decision for Canada. So I think it might be kind of indicative of the trade deals that we make, not just with the United States, but around the world. That in fact, we're always going to have this new eyes wide open posture. And that's the F-35 to me was a good example of it.
Well, defense is not an area I've worked in much. I've got no particular expertise on the hardware versus competitors, but my gut tells me that's where we end up, Dave, and I'm much more comfortable when it comes to defense and remaining in the North American orbit. But here's what my guess would be. I think this turns out to be part of an overall package, right? So what do we put on the table? We've already talked about doing more in defense, and that is underway. We haven't talked enough about how our supply management system and policies, drive up prices for Canadians, and that's an irritant on trade. We have backed down the digital services tax, and there's other issues around technology and the American plate. What I'm driving at here is you need a compromise where we put things on the table. The president's going to have to come out looking like a winner. And when he's done deals with other countries, it's been around things like auto where they demonstrate more sales coming. I think that would be a highly visible win for the president that's actually right for Canada as part of the trade-off to get stability on the market access for Canadian companies.
Mm-hmm. As we record this, we're less than 24 hours away from, Keith, the 1,200 jobs going away in Oshawa. They're moving the Silverado. I think 50,000 units a year are moving to Fort Wayne, Indiana, and you compound that with the Ingersoll layoffs and closures at Stellantis. There were the 3,000 lost jobs in Brampton at Stellantis, that is. But, I saw this morning Toyota saying, hey, we're all in on our 8,500 workers at the 3 plants in southwestern Ontario. And I appreciate the fact that, and you and I have covered lots of stories and hung around out at the plants in Oshawa over the years when there were these seemingly annual announcements about, shift shutdowns and plant closures and so on. We're at a point, I think, particularly in this sector, and because it's so central to the North American free trade conversation, The auto sector is on the verge of requiring, we need it to evolve. And I think the EV conversation out of China accelerates that. All the heat and hyperbole around it's going to wreck the economy or ruin the market. We only manufactured in this country 40,000 EVs ever in the history of Canadian manufacturing, 40,000. So we don't really have a manufacturing sector that deals with EVs. One, two, we're happy to be in the market for a new vehicle. Leases are up. And so I started to kind of dig around and look at where all of them are. The most attractive ones, from my perspective, hybrids and EVs, are all pretty much made in Korea, Japan, elsewhere around the world. We don't invest in that technology in terms of manufacturing. It's time, if we want to really do this, Canada should actually be in a place where we create an innovation environment for the auto sector to say, this is the new view of the auto sector. We're going to have to recalibrate the entire sector and move that thing forward, because we're looking at an auto sector that's, 30 years in the rear view mirror right now in terms of how we think we're going to manage it and keep jobs in this country.
Absolutely. Just before, if I could go back to the F-35 for just 1 second.
Yeah.
Remember, Trump said he would put a kill switch in the damn thing he sold to any other country. You just want to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
On the EV sector and the autos, clearly Canada has gone backwards. In fact, when Ford came in, he ripped out the EV charging stations at the GO stations, for goodness sakes. Mm-hmm. And to your point, the sector has to evolve. And I think, of course, that's why we had a federal, and still have, an electric vehicle, zero vehicle emission mandate for 2035, because the sector does have to evolve. But does it have to be complete? Does it have to be, completely phasing out gasoline and diesel-fired combustible engines? I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think that's what everyone wants. Certainly not yet. But the industry itself, and I think we're seeing with this Toyota investment, why are they able to do this? Because they're going to retool some of their stuff. They already have the manufacturing plants in southwestern Ontario. They're going to retool to also add in some battery manufacturing there, so they can make the electric or hybrid RAV4s. That's great. And it's exactly what we need to see. BYD, the biggest Chinese manufacturer of electric vehicles, is already manufacturing trucks and buses in Mississauga, electric vehicles. They're going to have to come in here at some point. There's going to be mostly their vehicles that come in. They've got the biggest overstock. They're the biggest manufacturer in China. So under the 49,000 vehicles, a lot of them are going to be theirs. We have to be ready, as you say, do some innovation. And I think bringing these in from the Chinese market is going to absolutely spur something. What's the biggest slam against EV range, or the biggest concern for most would-be consumers, is range. They're just worried. Well, the Chinese EVs are coming in at 1,000 kilometers. That ought to cover your range concern. If you go more than 1,000 kilometers in a day, you can stop and have a meal and charge up. I mean, seriously, that's like double most of what we're seeing in our vehicles here. Some are up to 500 and 600 here. But we're not going to get the innovation without the competition. So I think perhaps Carney was right to let these come in. I know the auto sector really doesn't think so. It's a toehold in. But we're not making them ourselves, to your point. We need the innovation coming on here, not just investing in battery plants, but investing in new manufacturing of electric vehicles and hybrids in particular in Canada. I don't think we're going to get BYD over here building cars here. I think they're going to send in components. They might, set up plants where they put assembled things, but I think they're going to basically build them in China, assemble them here. Maybe we can get some, we can manufacture the batteries, but it's going to be a whole new industry, and relying on the three American-owned auto giants to take us into the future, it's not the way to go.
Not going to happen.
By Donald Trump. So we have to do it with the other companies.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the GM products, Ford products, John. They're actually ending some models of hybrids and EVs. They're bailing out. I mean, Stellantis is pretty much shutting down in Ingersoll because they've abandoned the EV van that they were building. And they'll say, well, there was no market. And I think that the whole question around infrastructure, as Keith points out, is at the heart of the soft EV markets. But we need to actually pay attention to the market itself and insist on innovation and evolving it.
I suppose we're in a bit of an evolution, aren't we? I mean, the reason why the electric cars were such a big thing for Canada was because Biden and Trudeau had basically agreed that by 2035 we should be doing all of the electric cars to save the climate from climate change. I mean, Trump comes in and says, bullshit to that. You're gone. Boom, you're out of here. We're going to do coal. We're going to do gas. We're going to do whatever we want. I mean, and screw all of this stuff on mandates. So it's gone. The market evaporates overnight. Are Canadians buying those kind of cars? Not really. I mean, Teslas are made in China. If you brought a whole bunch of them over here under that quota, would people buy them? Not likely. And to your point, infrastructure. I mean, you think of my daughter's going to drive from here to Ottawa, as she did the other night in a snowstorm, that I feel comfortable with her in some kind of electric car where there's no infrastructure along the way to see if she can get all the way to Ottawa without having to stop and get a charge. I mean, of course not. Hybrids are probably the best kind of car that you can get here in this country. So I guess I turn around to this and say, look, you can ship 49,000 cars here, but it takes consumers to buy them. If they're not buying them, so what, right? At the end of the day. Yep. And of course, Carney knows this. I mean, and what did he get? He got canola for Scott Moe, and he's done a whole bunch of other stuff to repair the relationship over there. So again, I come back to this and sort of say, what we have a chance to reinvent this country in terms of its industrial base and what it looks for. I mean, Carney's also gone out to Alberta, and you hear Ford now echoing it by saying, "Oh, we should be the energy capital of the world." Well, we've got nuclear, we've got solar, we've got oil and gas, we've got refineries that could be put up. Look at British Columbia and the amount of money that they're going to get in order to get the pipeline to the coast if that happens, and all the refinery that's going to be made there. We're in an era right now where we can actually say, we haven't got all the pieces together here, but we can play the world and we can put other pieces here. And I think that's how this prime minister is pitching the country. So again, you can bring in 50,000 of these electric cars a year, but the market is not here. Canadians are not buying them. That's the thing. And if you're going to have the Koreans insteod doing a hybrid automotive plant in this country, that's what's going to make the difference.
I agree entirely.
Have workers at those plants as opposed to where they won't be working.
But to me, Tim, that's the innovation. And the more I've talked to guys over the last couple of months about this, is to say, the EV is probably okay in terms of the climate south of the border. It's more, we don't have the extreme cold and so on that we would have in Canada, generally speaking. So it's harder on the battery and all those sorts of things. But the hybrid is something that Canadians have kind of latched onto. And I throw out, for example, is that where we can show some level of innovation in terms of manufacturing? If we can create a manufacturing hub for hybrid vehicles in Canada, and let's take the mandates out of it. I mean, I think it's such an artificial thing, and it actually is harder on the markets and the economy. Take that out of it, and even let's take the climate change conversation out of it. I've been driving a hybrid for the last 4 years, and almost 40% of my mileage is electric. So that $1.50 a liter of gas to me is less than $1. It's saving me freaking money at the gas pump just because I've got the hybrid. And to me, that's a selling point in the long term for, again, creating some innovative approach to the automotive sector in Canada.
Yeah, look, I'm going to remain a consumer choice guy, and markets as a driver probably till I'm in my grave. So I have a hybrid. I had two hybrids. They must have been targets because they both got stolen. Lexus and for coming from Toyota base. But the EV, the whole EV mandate discussion, and I worry we might drift into that in hybrid as the next big champion, right? And it was so reminiscent of the McGuinty, Smitherman, green energy industrial revolution that was going to turn us into a nation of leaders when it comes to wind farms and solar, and that was a huge mistake that drove up prices and cost us a lot of money as taxpayers. Look, I'm confident in our workforce. I'm confident that with affordable, clean energy through nuclear, through good training programs, strong education, our workers can build the best cars, no doubt about it. And I welcome investment from whether it's Americans, Koreans, Japanese, Europeans, but I do worry about China. Why? And while I worry about China is because of the heavy subsidies they have for their vehicles, that they're financed through state-owned banks, the role of government and directness. I do worry that there's more of a mission than just making money like the other countries, but to undermine the manufacturing bases of other nations, to make them dependent on China for those goods, and in so doing have greater influence over their choices when it comes to foreign policy. I just don't trust anything connected to the Chinese government.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean
let
that's
me
the
ask
third
you
level
this.
of the chess game, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but you know more about this than I do, Tim. So I throw it back to you. Okay, so I mean, look at the price of cars in this country. You want to go and buy a car? It's incredible the amount of money you have to shell out for a brand new car. You want to go out and buy a Tesla? It's incredible the amount of money. I mean, I was in China before all of the problems happened. In 2018, I went on a 10-day tour there, and we, and saw the electric vehicles and some of the other plants that were building these cars. They were remarkable, like incredible. Okay, so they come to this country as an electric vehicle, cost $35,000. Okay, so they're heavily subsidized, but where can Canadians afford to look at the roster of what the cost of the car is nowadays and say, oh, you know what, I'm going to go out and buy an $85,000 car? Come on, really? Like there's something out of whack here where we're kind of going, well, the cars that we produce here, it's worth paying an extra $30,000 or $35,000 for a car versus something coming in from another country that's going to be a lot less. There's a disconnect here where there is a problem with the amount of money it's being charged for this kind of car. And it happened after COVID, like it was a built-in supply chain problem, but the amount of money just shocks me in terms of how much I would pay for a North American car versus something else. Yeah,
you're right. It spilled over to used cars right after that. It was part of the affordability crisis faced by the middle class, particularly. But I just don't know, John, if the answer is to fling open the doors to China, at least when the European Union made a deal with the Chinese government to allow access for electric vehicles. They did have a price mechanism to try to reflect how heavily they were subsidized. We've put it at a 6.7% most favored nation tariff rate. I think that is far too aggressive, opening our doors when there's cheating happening.
But again, I wonder, again, we're at a bit of an inflection point, right? Like we have a president of the United States who walking through that plant down in the States before he gave the finger to the guy yelling at him, who basically said, we don't need Canada. We can make it all here. We don't need anything in that. We don't need anything from the auto manufacturer. Like, you want to deal with that guy? I mean, you want to put faith that he's actually going to cook a good deal for this country? The answer is no. So I don't know what Ford and Carney have other than to look to other markets. And you can't ignore having a relationship with China. And if it's to say, look, we're going to get 49,000 cars in here and leave it up to consumers to choose, what happens if half of them sit on the lot? What it's going to drive is innovation from our side of the border to make sure that whatever we have here is competitive with that. So I'm an optimist. I think this is opening up the world to Canada. Like I'm really optimistic and jazzed about this. But I think we're also smart enough to know, and I know the Premier says, oh, don't buy one of these because they'll listen to everything that you're talking about. My Google, every time I talk on this show, shows me a whole bunch of ads for Ontario. Like, really?
Yeah, my last shot on China, and I'll shut up on it for the show. But yeah, no doubt, the devil in the White House, really hard to deal with. But a new deal with the devil out of China. They took Canadians hostage for a long period of time. They stole our technology. They ripped off Nortel. They have basically Chinese police working in our country to undermine our elections. Anyone make a deal with them for cheap cars? True.
But if Canada under Trudeau hadn't taken the CEO of Huawei and stuck her in a jail cell for a period of time and then under house arrest, we wouldn't be in the same situation. It was tit for tat. You and I know that. I mean, the Americans asked for it. Would we do the same for today? So I get you. I'm not saying anything about the issues that we're going to have with security, the huge market, the subsidization of the cars, all that sort of stuff. What I am saying is we can't ignore having a relationship with China. You got to have a three-dimensional perspective on the deals that we're going to be cutting, because Scott Moe's sitting at the table, and you heard what the farmers said as soon as the deal was cut. They were all going, man, this is fantastic. We may be wary about China, but we need to get canola and potash sold to the world, and this is the first step. So, you know what? I think we're dealing with a prime minister who's pretty smart at all of this, and that we're gonna see some progress. But I don't know. I think most Canadians are past putting 3/4 of their eggs in one basket south of the border. I think we're way past that.
And Tim, the Americans are also trying to interfere in our election process. They're meeting, the Trump administration officials are meeting with these clowns from Alberta that want to separate. That's, I know it's not as bad as China's behavior overall, but it's getting right up there. They're putting money into this separation nonsense to interfere in Canada's election and bitch that we were interfering in theirs when Trump ran the Reagan anti-tariff ad. It just seems a bit hypocritical to me. To your earlier point, though, Tim, when you talked about Smitherman and McGuinty, the Liberal government bringing in the big Samsung wind farm deal that was going to change our whole economy. I remember that news conference very specifically because I felt I was at a university course that I was failing. They couldn't explain it to me. They could not make it make sense to me. I left the room after 45 minutes and said, this does not make sense. I went to my office and I think either the minister or his top aide came over, deputy, and tried to. I wrote a pretty shitty story on that deal to begin with because it did not make sense from the get-go. And later on, it proved to be completely disastrous to our electricity system.
See, there's a lesson for all the current cabinet ministers, whatever stripe. It's got to pass the Keith Leslie test. It's got to make sense. You are right, my friend.
Stupid. I really, in 45 minutes, you should be able to explain a deal to me. I'm not that dumb. They could not make that one make sense.
We also have to remember, I mean, it was Ford who yesterday, let's go down the path of the separation thing, and let's just look at the polling for a moment. I mean, it's a very different era than we were in when Brian Tobin and Jean Chrétien and everybody had to go into Quebec and argue for that last percentage point. I remember polling on that. We were actually polling not only for the news media at that time, but we had a section I was in the section that was actually doing it for Premier Ray. Like we were literally doing, 2,500 sample a week in those days was a lot. And we were skimming the tops of the trees. And I remember that night when we were sitting there for the vote to be done. We were in Vancouver with Angus and everybody at the house. We had a glass of wine and we toasted to the new Canada because we didn't know which way it was going to go. Take a look at the numbers now. Basically, probably about 30 to 35% of people in Alberta and about 25% in Quebec who are pro-separatist. Then what you do is you layer on the stress test. That's what they call it in polling. It's kind of like, okay, so you're in favor of this. What happens if this happens? What happens if that happens? And it automatically cuts the support in half. So if you're in Alberta and you're saying 35%, that sounds pretty high, well, then tell them what it's going to do. You think you're going to have a passport? Forget it. You think you're going to have sovereignty association? Forget it. It brings it down to about 15 to 20%. So you're sitting at 20% there. In Quebec, it's a very different era. It brings it down to about 15 to 20% over there. So we should take it seriously. The United States is going to, as you said, Keith, they're going to do everything that they can to destabilize. I mean, J.D. Vance has said that that's the new world, right? We're going to go in there and we're going to destabilize the world doing it. But it's nowhere close to where it was. And, Danielle Smith has got her own issues to deal with in terms of the party. But the amount of people who are most likely to support this is about a fifth of the population, maybe a third at the most. But when you start dealing with the arguments about it, that drops in half. So it's not anywhere close to what it was before when we were skimming the treetops trying to figure out whether the country was going to hold together.
Okay, I have to top up the breadcrumbs here for the pigeons as we sit on the bench. So just bear with me before we go. We can't leave this conversation without acknowledging the review process, the vote for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative Party of Canada. It's going to happen tomorrow as we record this on the Friday of this week. Tim, there doesn't seem to be much question or doubt that he will, survive this, and I use that word advisedly. I think the general consensus is it's just going to be what kind of majority does he get? Does he hit the 70% mark and so on? But against that backdrop, and John and Keith have already alluded to it, these incredibly, I don't know if they're historic, but they're pretty eye-opening favorability numbers for Prime Minister Carney. Abacus has Carney's net favorability at plus 23. Liaison now saying that his approval rating, Carney's that is reaching 62%, and 57% have an unfavorable view of Pierre Poilievre. So he will be talking to the base this week in terms of getting the vote at the review. How does the war room for the Conservatives manage that public perception as you move into next week, the day one of the new life for Pierre Poilievre and moving forward?
The just on the leadership review, I remember when I did mine, and we hosted in Niagara Falls, which my home area there in Niagara. you put every effort into making every call. Your organizers out there, you get a good number, so you've got some stability and build forward, as you said there, Dave, from that point on. I got 79. I'm going to guess Poilievre. I'll do a little fun wager here the day before. I'll say he hits 80.5%, the Hudak guess, and in Western Canada. Okay, so where do you go from here? Well, I still believe that the largest portion today of Pierre Poilievre's fate rests with how Carney does. And if Carney is off to a strong start, as we discussed, if he gets a deal, some sort of stability with the Americans, he moves things across the country. It doesn't matter how much Poilievre performs. What do you do in the meantime? Look, he's got the solid support, and John can tell us more around those that will say affordability is our biggest challenge. And I think you try to look more the role for when Carney stumbles. But if he doesn't, I don't think it matters who the Conservative leader is.
Yeah, Keith, the and John alluded to this already. The idea that we may well be going to an election earlier. I was talking to Gene Velitis at CKTB in St. Catharines a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about this. And I said, if Poilievre gets a number that's soft, it's in the positives, but it's soft, in the high 60s, low 70s. And from a review perspective, that would, I think, be considered soft. He can claim, okay, I've got the mandate, I can keep going. But I got to think that there are the sharks on the Liberal side saying he's vulnerable now because he's got a weak mandate from his own party, and the unfavorable rating, 57%. Let's go. And if the question is not necessarily affordability but stability, then Carney wins going away.
I think Poilievre is a 50% success. If he gets that, he's staying. He's not going anywhere. And there's no one challenging him. There's no one out there right now saying, trying to undercut him at the knees and trying to undermine him in this vote. There just isn't. So whenever Carney decides to call an election, he's going to be likely facing Pierre Poilievre, especially if it's going to be in the shorter term. Will that embolden the Liberals? Do they really want to run against Poilievre again? Absolutely. Because he doesn't appear to have made any changes or improvements from the campaign style that dragged him down last time, that blew a 25-point lead. He appears to be hammering away at exactly the same sort of points. He's a little bit more critical of Trump, slightly. But for the most part, he's still being, the divisive type as opposed to bringing people together. So I don't see him appealing to the mass Canadians. This week, he's going to survive. I think Tim's right. He's going to survive this weekend's vote because there is no challenger. But where that's going to go, I think it's the Liberals as well want him to survive this weekend vote because they want to run against him again.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, John, the idea that, take advantage of the opportunity in front of you, that if, in fact, you look at the Tories, but the NDP there's just nothing there. Mark Carney can plant his flag almost at will in the next 6 months and do pretty much what he wants. And he would be better to do it in the short term because, as Tim points out, the longer the runway, the more likely he is perhaps to stumble.
Poilievre runs about 5 to 6 points behind his party. Carney runs 25 points ahead of his.
Wow.
There you go. There's a match right there. You want to put them in a ring together and do a cage match? You know who's going to win. That's it. Done.
Yeah.
Number two, the NDP will get their leader on March the 28th or so. And then they got to figure out a place to find a seat. And I'll tell you, the Prime Minister will help them do that by saying, you know what, we're gearing up. We're going to go. So you're going to have Poilievre, who on every measure that I can see in the polling doesn't get past 34. Okay? Him personally, on every measure. You've got 23% of the public who are hardcore conservatives, 14% who are joining soft conservatives, and the rest of the folk basically have moved over to the Liberals. So, I mean, if he gets chosen, great, but it's going to be an unfulfilled chalice. I mean, they're going to go and they're going to be up against, and the types of the games playing that's gone on in the House of Commons with the likes of Andrew Scheer and a few others, just ridiculous. So, I mean, it took Michelle Rempel to respond to Carney's speech in a very, very thoughtful manner. And everybody said, hey, that's the sort of thing they should have been responding with. Well, then, of course, Carney with his new campaign, Poilievre with his new campaign manager comes out with a statement a little bit later on. But see what's happened even since then. Carney's tilted. After the Quebec speech, he's gone and tilted towards affordability. Hey, we'll get you some grocery cash. We're going to do this for affordability. He's just turned the edge of the sail so that they can cut back against the grain, so that he can go into an election and say, hey, you want to play about affordability? I've already got this on the record. I've cut taxes. I'm doing a rebate on the GST. I've got this and this and this, and we're working for Canada. I mean, how do you cut against that? No. The opportunity for Poilievre was when Justin Trudeau was Prime Minister. That was his opportunity because he was fueling anger against Justin Trudeau. When Justin Trudeau left the stage, 17% of the entire Canadian public went, oh, he's gone. Let's see what else is here. Carney walks in and he's captured that side of the agenda. So, you know what? I'd say right now, with pretty good confidence, not only in the numbers, but what's coming, Poilievre is yesteryear's guy. It ain't going to work, and we're looking at probably 4 years of a Carney. And I think he's going to pull the plug after the NDP elect their leader. He'll say, I'll find you a seat. There you go. That's when we're going to have an election. Good luck to you. See you later. I think by May we're going to be into a majority federal government under Carney, and Pierre Poilievre is going to be looking for another job after that.
And 15 months ago, we would have said Pierre Poilievre was going to be the next Prime Minister of Canada, Tim. The other, and it'll be a minor thing,
right?
But the minor thing here, and it will create drama, is that Poilievre will not be running again in the riding that he won the by-election. So where will he run? And then that will create a whole tempest around the future of the leader. So I think this is going to be, a good weekend for him, but not necessarily. He's certainly not out of the woods as far as this is concerned.
There's no doubt, right? It's events, dear boy, events. And Carney rose to the occasion. He had the right resume for the job, and he's so far proving up to the job. It's a tough road ahead.
All right, lots to talk about, and good of you guys to be here this week. Tim, I know you're off doing your second interview for the Bills job. So you won't be able to join.
Good for you, Tim.
Yeah, dream come true, eh? Oh man. Well, wish me luck. Well, they got Brady now as coach, but offensive coordinator. I think Josh Allen and I were like this. At least
there you go.
In my mind.
Right, that's all good. All right, so we'll be back at it again next week. Welcome back, and if you're wondering, Kathleen Wynne was otherwise occupied, she will be back in the chair next week. So over the next few weeks, we'll have the entire crew around the table. Tim Hudak, Keith Leslie, John Wright, thank you all. And this is On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. We're happy to be back in the saddle. If you've got a thought on the show, check us out on YouTube. You can leave comments there. Otherwise, subscribe to the show where you listen and where you watch. Thanks for joining us. I'm Dave Trafford. Have a good weekend. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics Podcast.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.